Hey everyone, ready to maybe rethink what we thought we knew about prehistory?
Yeah.
Because today's deep dive is all about this, frankly, fascinating book, Cyborgs versus the Earth Goddess.
Oh,
Title alone, right?
I catch you.
We're going to be exploring whether ancient societies, get this, were actually female-centered.
All right, sign me up.
I knew this one would be right up your alley.
Absolutely.
So to give everyone a little background here, the author, Dr. Seenarine, has some serious credentials, by the way.
Yeah, he's got a really interesting background. Graduated from Columbia University. He's taught at Hunter College.
Wow.
His work has even been cited by, the UN Human Rights Watch.
Oh, wow.
Legit organizations,
Yeah.
so this isn't just some out there theory. This is a serious academic deep dive.
So we should mention, too, this book is creating quite a buzz.
Oh.
Feminist thinkers, activists are calling it revolutionary. Some are even saying it's a potential paradigm shift.
Yeah.
So we're not just like dusting off old history books here, right?
Right.
We're talking about a whole new way of seeing potentially our past.
Yeah, I mean, the book's core argument really challenges, I think, how we commonly understand prehistory. It suggests that for, the vast majority of human history, a female-centric, earth-honoring culture, that was actually the norm.
Okay, so hold on. When I hear cyborg, I'm thinking like sci-fi, not history book. Help me out here.
It's definitely more of a metaphor.
Okay.
He's talking about a way of thinking, a mindset. Think of it like this. It's a way of thinking that seeks to kind of control and dominate nature rather than coexist with it.
Gotcha.
And he very much includes women in this idea of nature.
So then how does this all connect to this idea of the 7 domestications? Because honestly, when I first saw that phrase, I'm picturing like houseplants.
Right.
I wasn't really putting it in the context of civilization.
And that's kind of the beauty of this book, is that it weaves together these seemingly disparate threads. You've got these 7 domestications, and Dr. Seenarine is directly linking the subjugation of women to the domestication of animals, and really to the domestication of the natural world.
Interesting.
So he's suggesting that, by understanding one, we can better grasp the other. And it's clear that this topic is very personal for him. He actually dedicates the book to his mother and his grandmothers.
Oh, wow.
And in it, he talks about the importance of uncovering this hidden history.
Yeah, it's a very powerful dedication for sure. Before we kind of get deeper into these 7 domestications, though, can you paint us a picture of this ecogynocentric world that he's talking about?
So imagine a world where social structures revolved around respect for the earth, for feminine principles like nurturing, cooperation, cyclical renewal.
Okay.
That's really the heart of ecogenocentrism, this idea that these principles, often associated with femininity, weren't just present, but they formed the foundation of these pre-patriarchal societies. So it was about interconnectedness, balance, reverence for life itself.
That sounds amazing, but where's the evidence?
Right.
How do we know this wasn't just some fleeting peaceful moment before things, went sideways?
Well, he uses, archaeological and anthropological findings, particularly from the Paleolithic era, to kind of bolster his argument. And look, he's not suggesting there was no conflict, but rather that the fundamental power structures, the values, they were just inherently different.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics. Where does he even begin?
He tackles one of the biggest myths out there, man the hunter.
Right.
This classic image of the brave provider bringing home food for his family. He argues that while hunting existed, of course, it wasn't necessarily the primary means of sustenance for early humans.
And this is where it gets really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because he really highlights the often overlooked role of women as the gatherers, and not just gathering berries, but really possessing this deep knowledge of plants for food, for medicine, everything.
Imagine a world without supermarkets or pharmacies. In those times, understanding which plants were safe, which could heal, that was literally life or death. And Dr. Seenarine argues that women, they were the original holders of this botanical expertise. They were the first herbalists, the pharmacists, if you will.
And not just that, but also their role in developing and mastering essential technologies, like firekeeping, cooking.
Huge.
I mean, it's hard to imagine human evolution without those game changers.
And yet we often overlook these, seemingly everyday practices.
Right.
But they were fundamental.
Yeah.
And often driven by women.
It's like history's biggest unacknowledged behind every great man situation,
Yeah.
But it goes beyond just practical skills. He also looks at ancient art
Oh, absolutely.
as evidence for this female-centric worldview.
Think about the Venus figurines that we find all over the ancient world.
Blah.
These voluptuous female forms, or the prevalence of female figures in cave paintings, often depicted in these really interesting, like, ceremonial, ritualistic contexts. He's arguing these weren't just artistic choices, they reflect a deep reverence for female power, for creativity, for the life-giving forces that women embody.
It really gives a whole new meaning to that phrase, putting her on a pedestal.
Right.
And then there's the grandmother hypothesis. This idea that women's longer lifespans played a much more vital role in these societies than we maybe give them credit for.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just that they were living longer.
Right.
They were the keepers of knowledge. They were the storytellers. They were really the nurturers of future generations. I mean, it really challenges our modern obsession with youth, doesn't it?
It really makes you think about where wisdom and experience really come from. But if this ecogynocentric way of life, if it was so pervasive, what happened? How did things shift so dramatically?
That, my friend, is the question that leads us to the next chapter.
Ooh.
The shift in power. And that's what we'll pick up with when we come back on our deep dive into cyborgs versus the Earth Goddess.
So we've been kind of painting this picture of, like, this ecogynocentric world,
Right.
this time where reverence for the earth and feminine principles was just, like, dominant.
Yeah.
But we know things change.
Yeah.
Dr. Seenarine points to the rise of domestication, animal domestication particularly, as a turning point.
It's not so much the act of domesticating animals in and of itself,
Yeah.
but what that shift represented. Remember the 7 domestications? This is where it all starts to really unfold.
Okay.
Because as humans, particularly men, as they learn to control animal breeding, animal behavior, it led to a surplus of resources
Yeah.
on a scale that hadn't really been seen before.
Right, and I'm already seeing where you're going with this because surplus resources, well, they always seem to lead to power struggles.
Always.
Hierarchies.
Yeah.
Someone wanting to be in charge of all that abundance. And according to Dr. Seenarine, that someone was, well, not typically a woman.
Exactly. So this control that, men were able to exert over these really essential resources allowed them to establish these new forms of dominance. But to solidify that power, they needed to kind of reshape the narrative, right? Create a new story. And this is where we start to see myths and stories emerge that kind of diminish female power, often demonizing or really trying to control things that were associated with the feminine.
Gotcha.
Like nature, fertility, even female sexuality itself.
So it's almost like flipping the script.
Totally.
Instead of reverence for the feminine, reverence for nature,
Yeah.
you have these narratives cropping up that are like, no, we have to control this.
Exactly. And he illustrates how deeply ingrained this becomes
Okay.
through a kind of unexpected example, the word bitch.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I know it's like a little jarring at first,
Yeah.
but it really makes you think.
I'm curious, how does that word connect to this, larger shift in power dynamics?
Well, he points out that originally, bitch was associated with powerful female canines. Like the alpha female leading the pack, protecting her young, commanding respect. But as male dominance grew, the word was like twisted. And it became this derogatory term that was used to control and demean women. And it's a subtle but potent example of how language itself can be used to kind of reinforce these power structures.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point about how the meaning of language can be manipulated alongside these shifts in power.
Yeah.
But what about the women during this time? Were they just kind of passive bystanders as this new dynamic took hold?
And that's such a crucial question. And Dr. Seenarine really pushes back against this idea of women as simply victims in this process.
Okay.
He says there's a long history of female resistance to patriarchal control, even if it's often absent from mainstream historical narratives.
So while there may not have been like burning bras in the Paleolithic era,
Yeah.
they weren't just like accepting this new world order. What did this resistance look like?
And it often wasn't overt, or
Right.
confrontational. And we have to remember, for most of human history, survival depended on cooperation,
Right.
not just competition.
Yeah.
So resistance might have been very subtle. It might have been holding on to traditional knowledge, finding ways to sort of exert influence within these new power structures, even quietly passing down stories and myths that kind of preserved a different worldview.
Like an underground movement almost.
Totally.
Preserving these old ways and resisting these new ones. But, if these ecogynocentric values, if they were so ingrained, Why weren't they able to withstand this rise of this cyborg mentality? Like, why couldn't they turn the tide?
That's the question that really lingers throughout the book, and it's one he doesn't shy away from.
Yeah.
He draws a very direct line between the suppression of those ecogynocentric principles and the environmental crisis that we're facing today.
So it's not just about gender dynamics then.
It's about our relationship with the planet itself.
Yeah.
He's arguing that disrespecting nature and subjugating women, they're two sides of the same coin. And he even looks at how, we view female sexual selection in nature. This is a powerful force that drives evolution.
Yeah.
And he contrasts it with the control that's exerted over women's bodies, over their choices in these patriarchal societies.
It really makes you wonder, what would the world look like if we'd held on to some of those ecogynocentric values?
Right.
If we'd maintained that balance.
Right.
Feminine, masculine, nature, humanity.
Absolutely. It's a powerful question.
Yeah.
And it leads us to where Dr. Seenarine takes us in this final act, where he really explores these echoes of this seemingly lost world and what it might hold for our future.
Intriguing.
But, let's delve into that in this final part of our deep dive.
So we've come a long way, haven't we?
We have.
We started by talking about this time when a female-centric, earth-honoring worldview, supposedly, was dominant.
Right.
And now here we are in the present day. So where does Dr. Seenarine leave us after this roller coaster ride through history?
Well, he doesn't exactly give us a fairy tale ending.
Right.
He's very honest about the challenges and the violence that women have faced and continue to face, obviously, under these patriarchal systems.
Right.
And he really connects these 7 domestications we keep talking about to our modern world.
Yeah.
He argues that each one kind of further distanced us from that original ecogynocentric balance.
Right.
And ultimately, he kind of suggests this culminates in what he calls the 7th domestication,
which is
the domestication of women themselves.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack. But even with that stark picture that he paints, I feel like he does offer some hope.
Right.
It's not all doom and gloom.
No, definitely not. Remember that wild woman archetype that we touched on?
Yeah.
The one that represents this deep, almost instinctual connection to nature. He positions her as a powerful counter-narrative to this cyborg mentality.
And just as a reminder for our listeners, this archetype, which we see in mythology, we see in literature, embodies the untamed, the intuitive aspect of feminine energy.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about primal wisdom, strength, things that resist control.
Yes. And he believes that reconnecting with that archetype, both individually and collectively, could be key to navigating the challenges we face today. And it's not just about, women reclaiming their power, but really about all of humanity rediscovering the importance of those values that were, in his view, once at the core of society. Cooperation, balance, respect for the earth, and for the feminine.
So are we saying we stumbled upon a roadmap to, dismantle the patriarchy and save the planet, all thanks to a deep dive into prehistory?
Oh, if only it were that simple.
Right.
Look, he's very clear. There are no easy answers. There are no quick fixes. But I think what he does offer is a really profound reframing of the questions that we should be asking and the connections we might be overlooking. It's almost as if he's holding a mirror up to history and to ourselves and asking, what if we've gotten it all wrong?
It's definitely thought-provoking. And I think that's what's made this conversation so interesting, right? It's not about saying this is the definitive version of the past. It's about opening our minds to other possibilities.
Absolutely.
Other ways of understanding the world and our place in it.
I think that's a challenge worth embracing.
100%. So to our listeners, we'll leave you with this. Could understanding our ecogynocentric past be a key to tackling some of these huge environmental and social challenges that we're facing today? We encourage you to check out Cyborgs versus the Earth Goddess. Explore the evidence and let us know what you think. Until next time, keep asking those big questions.
And keep diving deep.
And keep diving deep.